Welcome to the book of Exodus, which in many ways functions as a bridge to the rest of the Old Testament. You see, the central actors on the stage of the Old Testament are God Himself and the nation of Israel. Now, in the book of Genesis, God promised Abraham and Sarah that a nation would come from them, and now in Exodus, that nation is born. Born in more ways than one. You see, we leave the book of Genesis with the family of Jacob, all 70 of them, fruitful and multiplying in the garden land of Goshen. They are in Egypt. Now, when we turn the page to Exodus, we pick up right where we left off. Let me show you what I mean. So back here in Genesis, this is chapter 47, we see that Israel, that's another name for Jacob, and his family settle in the land of Egypt. They're in Goshen. It's amazing in this fruitful land, and they themselves are fruitful and they multiply greatly. All, like I said, all 70 of them settled there in Egypt. Well, time goes by, about 400 years that is, and now we come to Exodus. And here in Exodus, there are our 70 persons, the family of Israel, of Jacob, and they are fruitful and they're multiplying exceedingly and abundantly there in the land of Egypt. 430 years go by, and that 70 people in the family of Jacob, they've multiplied to a nation, and a large nation. But in order for this nation to function as a blessing, a conduit of blessing to all the other nations in the world, that is their purpose, by the way, stated and given to them in Genesis 12, verse 3, the nationhood of Israel must consist of more than simply a lot of people. It must have a constitution, that is, laws given to them by God for them to live by. They need their mission to be defined for them, which it will be in Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6. They need the very presence of God to be dwelling in their midst. We're going to learn about that in the tabernacle sections here at the end of Exodus. And they need a land, don't they? They need to be planted in the land. And there is one man standing in the way of Israel departing Egypt and going to that land promised to them, and that man is Pharaoh. We read in the beginning of Exodus, chapter 1, verse 8, that a new king sat on the throne over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And this new king feared Israel, which was fruitful and multiplying and growing in his country. And this, of course, is the nation that is called to bless Egypt and all other nations. Regardless, he fears Israel, and he makes 3 attempts to oppress them and to subdue them so that, in his mind, they will no longer be a threat to him. So, attempt number 1, he enslaves the entire people group, forces them to do hard labor. And then he orders the Hebrew midwives to kill every every Jewish baby boy after he is born. And finally, attempt number 3, to subdue the people of Israel, Pharaoh orders his own people to throw all baby Hebrew boys into the Nile River. This is genocidal maniac being described here in Pharaoh, wicked and murderous. But just like the Joseph narratives there at the end of the book of Genesis, God is going to take this evil and turn it into good. Let me show you how God is going to do that here in the opening chapter of Exodus. So we have Pharaoh setting taskmasters over Israel to afflict them with heavy burdens. And what was the result of this? How did God turn this into good? The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread abroad. Didn't work. All right, attempt number 2. Hebrew midwives. If it's a boy after he's born, you shall kill him. But the Hebrew wives feared God. They didn't do that. And as a result of this, the people still multiplied and grew very strong. The evil was turned into good. But I ask you, how is God going to turn this 3rd attempt about the order to throw all the Hebrew boys into the Nile, how is he going to turn that into good? Well, with this order, Pharaoh is going to literally invite Israel's deliverer into his own house. Now, you know the story, don't you? Moses' parents, his mom in particular, notices that this baby boy is beautiful in appearance. Of course, she doesn't want him to be killed, thrown into the Nile. So she puts Moses into a basket, and that basket floats down the Nile River right to Pharaoh's house, where Pharaoh's daughter has pity on this young boy and adopts him into Pharaoh's house. Now, you know that story, but do you know that the Hebrew word for basket that Moses was placed in by his mother, that word shows up only in one other story in the entire Hebrew Bible, and that is in Genesis 6-9, the story of Noah's Ark. You see, we could translate the word basket there in Exodus chapter 2 as Noah's or Moses's ark instead of his basket. You see, just as Noah's ark was a floating refuge which delivered the seed of the woman from a world given over to decreation, in the same way, Moses's ark is going to bring about the deliverance of the seed of the woman, that is the people of Israel, from slavery and oppression as God decreates the nation of Egypt with 10 acts of decreation. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here. We're not going to focus on the plagues in this lecture. Moses is still a baby here at this point in Exodus chapter 2, and he still needs to grow up in Pharaoh's household, witness the persecution of his people, mistakenly intervene by murdering one of the Egyptian taskmasters, trying to bring about the deliverance of his people by his own strength and in his own wisdom. Not a good idea. Results in his exile in the land of Midian for 40 years. And yet, despite all of that, Moses' early failures in life, he is still God's chosen deliverer. Now, how is God going to bring this deliverer back to the land of Egypt so that he can deliver his people out of the land of Egypt? Well, it turns out God is going to use a bit of a light show, the burning bush, in Exodus chapter 3. Now I ask you, what was it that led the people of Israel through the wilderness? What will lead them through the wilderness? It was a pillar of fire, wasn't it? And now, what did Israel see on the top of Mount Sinai, where the Lord descended on that mountain in fire? And then, what was the light on day one of creation when God said, "Let there be light," when he didn't create the sun until day 3? Well, it must have been God's own presence. You see, God's presence is often manifested in light and fire in the Old Testament, in the Bible. And just like the sun, that source of light and fire, in its holiness, it is both life-giving and also dangerous. And this is why Moses is told to remove his sandals, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. This is my holy presence, God says. Now, that word holy, kodesh, this is the first time that word shows up in the Hebrew Bible, so tuck that one away. Well, evidently, despite there's this bush that's speaking to him, the angel from within the bush, and the bush is not being consumed, Moses is not very impressed, because when this angel commissions him to go to Pharaoh and to call him to release the Hebrew people, Moses responds not with one, not with two, but with 5 excuses, 5 objections why he shouldn't be the guy to go call Pharaoh to release the Israelites from the nation of Egypt. Instead of responding with glee and with joy, "Oh God, you're finally going to fulfill your promises, keep your promises, and bring your people to the land promised to them," Moses responds with 5 objections. Take a look at these 5 objections of Moses. Well, after his initial failure, perhaps I can sympathize with his first objection, in which he simply asks God, "Who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and ask them to do this?" Now, God, he recognizes that Moses doesn't need a self-esteem boost. He doesn't need to be told, "Moses, you are great. I know you can do it." You're amazing, Moses. You're the guy. No, what Moses needs is to take his eyes off of himself and onto God. And that is why God tells him, I will be with you. That's his response to, who am I? God says, I will be with you. Well, Moses takes the bait, it seems, at least initially, here in his second objection, in which he asks God, who are you? What is your name? What if the people ask me, hey, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Now, this question, what is your name, God, is it introduces a critically important theme in the book of Exodus. Who is God? What is the meaning of his name? And in the book of Exodus, in many ways, it is designed to answer that question. And the short answer is I am who I am. That is my name, or at least it's one of them. Because here in this section in Exodus 3, God is going to provide three different names. Let me show you what I mean here. So name number one, I am who I am. Eyeh, Asher, Eyeh. I am who I am. But then this is the full expression, but then we have a shortened form as well, which is simply only Eyeh. That's just the I am. And then we have a conjugated form. So it would be a little bit odd for Moses to go up to the people of Israel and they ask, hey, who's this guy you're talking about? And he says, I am. And they're like, well, I know you are, Moses, but what do you mean? So he has the third person form, which we vocalize as Yahweh. He is. That is our God's name. He is the one who is self-existent. He is the eternal, self-existent one, the only uncaused cause. He is immutable. He is unchangeable. This is the being who has promised to bring the people out of Egypt. If anyone can accomplish that task, it is the great I am. And yet, that is not good enough for Moses, because he responds with another objection, saying, well, what about them? The people of Israel, they're never going to believe me. And God says, okay, fine. Here's a couple of signs. See that staff in your hand? It's going to become a snake. And that hand, throw it into your cloak, take it out. Now it's leprous. And why don't you have one more sign? Because sets of three are very critical in the Bible. Take a little bit of water from the Nile, throw it on the ground, it'll become blood. That'll convince him, I'm sure. Well, Moses is getting pretty nervous because that was a pretty good response to his objection. So he just comes up with another one, simply saying, oh, I can't do it, Lord. I am not eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue. And God says, who made man's mouth? I made you this way. I know that you will be able to accomplish this task that I've called you to do. I will be with your mouth. I will put words in it. And finally, Moses is out of excuses and he pleads with the Lord, oh, please send someone else. Now, we know that God is slow to anger. We're going to learn a little bit more about that in Exodus 34, but Moses finally got him there. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he says, what about Aaron? That guy can speak well. He will be your right-hand man. And just like that, Moses' conference with the burning bush is over. And he begins to head back to Egypt, where he meets Aaron. They together tell the people that their God has met with Moses, and he seeks to bring them out of the land of Egypt. And this is very important. The people believe. They believe what Moses has said and what Moses has promised. And this word is very important, of course, the word believe or the word faith. And it's only the second time that this word has showed up in the Hebrew Bible to this point. The first time, can you remember? It's in Genesis 15, verse 6, where Abraham believes the Lord and his promises, and that belief is counted to him as righteousness. So it's an important moment here at the end of chapter 4. But what about Pharaoh? Do you think he's going to believe Moses when Moses tells him that God has appeared to him? And this God, his name is the Lord, Yahweh, I am, says to you, Pharaoh, let my people go. How does Pharaoh respond? Well, he responds with a question. Who is this Yahweh? What are you talking about? Look at this moment here in chapter 5. A very important moment here in the book of Exodus. Thus says the Lord, says Yahweh, let my people go. Who is this Yahweh that I should obey his voice? I don't know anyone called Yahweh. Now, again, a critically important question for the book of Exodus. The entire book is in answer to that question. Who is Yahweh? Yahweh is going to introduce himself to Israel here in the book of Exodus, to Egypt, and to Pharaoh. And that's why again and again and again, especially in chapters 7 to 15, God is going to act so that the people know that I am Yahweh. That phrase is going to be repeated again and again in these chapters. Let me pull up a chart which gathers together every instance where it says that Yahweh acts so that the people may know that I am Yahweh. So what about the Egyptians? The Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh when I stretch out my hand against the land of Egypt with 10 plagues. The Egyptians also will know that I am Yahweh when their king, their Pharaoh, drowns in the Red Sea. And then Pharaoh, a little bit earlier, before he drowns, he's going to know that Yahweh is Israel's God when his precious Nile is turned into blood. He will know that there is no one like Yahweh, our God, when the frogs come leaping out of that Nile and just uh, completely dominate the land of Egypt. He will know that Yahweh is in the midst of the earth, that he acts deliberately when flies swarm in that land so much that you start swallowing them. You can't even get them out of your face. Well, look at this again. He will know that the earth is Yahweh's when thunder and hail rain down upon the land of Egypt and destroy its crops. And of course, by chapter 15, he's going to know with certainty what the name of Yahweh means. But Israel needs to know her God as well. And these early chapters, and certainly in this center section, it will demonstrate that Israel has a lot to learn. You see, when Moses first goes and confronts Pharaoh, telling him, "Let my people go," Pharaoh doesn't believe, and he commissions the people of Israel to continue their hard slavery, their work, but this time make bricks without straw. And the people, they complained bitterly to Moses, "Oh, you've made our life so hard. Why did you even attempt this deliverance of us?" Moses cries out to the people, and God responds with one more lesson about the meaning of his name. This is a curious few verses here at the beginning of chapter 6. Another lesson about the meaning of the name Yahweh. So here, bricks without straw. And the Lord responds to Moses, and he says, "I am Yahweh." Let's set the context here. We're talking about my name. I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty. This is El Shaddai. Let's pull up this as El Shaddai. But by my name Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them. Now this is weird because the name Yahweh, it's all over the book of Genesis. Abraham uses the name Yahweh. Isaac, Jacob, God himself refers to himself as Yahweh. So what is meant by the phrase, these guys, the patriarchs, did not know the name of Yahweh? Well, it appears that perhaps what's going on in the book of Genesis, God is a covenant, or he is a promise making God, but in Exodus, God is a promise keeping God. Take a look at that distinction here in another chart about the name of Yahweh. So here in Exodus, God tells Moses, "I have observed what has been done to my people in Egypt. I've heard their groaning. I heard the groaning of my people and what the Egyptians have done to them. And you know what? I promise that I will bring you up out of the land of Egypt, out from under the burdens. I will deliver you from your slavery. I will redeem you, bring you out from under the burdens." But all of that, bringing you out of Egypt, that's only step one. There's a crucial step two part of this equation here. And that is, I will give you the land. I've established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan. I will bring you into the land. I will give it to you for a possession. That is the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites. Here in the book of Exodus, Yahweh reveals the meaning of his name as a covenant-keeping, a promise-keeping God. And God covenanted with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to give them the land, and that is what he will do. He is a covenant-keeping God who topples tyrants, who liberates the oppressed with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. And we are going to see that arm in action in chapters 7 to 15 next.